When I was a kid, my biggest obsession wasn't sports, academics, movies, video games, or even that tantalizingly enigmatic species we called girls. Instead, from a very early age, I was obsessed with the written word, with books. Whether it was relating to Alexander and his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, or listening to my babysitter read me 2001: A Space Odyssey, I was a fan practically before I could walk. By the time I reached the end of middle school, I was already reading literature well beyond my peers. From the edgy political views of Ayn Rand to the complex sociology of Dostoevsky, the macabre poetry of Poe, the surreal reflections of Vonnegut, and the foundational narratives of Shakespeare, I read it all. When my friends were talking about becoming doctors, lawyers, firemen, police officers, and computer programmers, I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was already a writer.
I am a writer.
To me, there is something deeply and metaphysically important about fiction. So, you can probably guess why I'm super excited to talk about the Neverending Story.
What's that book about?
Oh, this is something special.
Turn around, look at what you see.
Bastian can't get enough of adventure, but his everyday life is a struggle marked by the death of his mother, poor grades, and bullies that leave him in the dumpster. One day, he comes across a very special book that is far more than it appears, and as he skips class to read it in the school attic, he is transported to the magical land of Fantasia, where an omnipresent nothing is threatening the very core of its existence. A boy named Atreyu is tasked with tracking down a cure for Fantasia's sickness, but first he must overcome impossible odds just to figure out where to begin. When the literary world and the real world begin to merge in ways Bastian doesn't comprehend, Bastian and Atreyu somehow must join forces to save Fantasia.
In 1979, the popular German author Michael Ende published a fantasy novel called Die Unendliche Geschichte, aka The Neverending Story. Hopefully my German pronunciation didn't offend any native speakers out there, because there will be more of it. The Neverending Story was a smash hit in Germany, where it topped Der Spiegel's bestseller list for over 2 years, and to this day, it is widely beloved across Europe and in Japan. It would not be overstating things to say it's one of the most important novels to ever come out of Germany. The movie rights for the book were purchased for $50,000 by executive producer Mark Damon, who approached the head of Neue Konstantin Film, Bernd Eichinger. Eichinger, having seen his own children reading the book, was excited by the prospect of turning it into a film, and he envisioned a massive German-based production that could compete with Hollywood on the world stage. A preliminary screenplay by Hermann Weigel was given the stamp of approval for Michael Ende, and to direct, Eichinger hired Helmut Dietl, who was just starting to make a name for himself directing the television series Monaco Franze. Dietl, though, quickly became overwhelmed by the scale and scope of the project and bowed out, only to be replaced by rising wunderkind Wolfgang Petersen, fresh from the success of Das Boot, a large-scale spectacle picture that took him 3 years to complete. As a side note, it's hands down the best submarine movie ever made. Under Petersen and Eichinger, the script went through several changes to make the material less unwieldy, but this drew the ire of Michael Ende. Ende, who at one point expressed the hope that Akira Kurosawa would direct it, he was a bit of a weeb, had envisioned a quiet, more somber movie that strictly adhered to his novel, but Eichinger wanted something bombastic, calculating that the film would have to appeal to American tastes in order to make a profit from its 60 million Deutschmark budget. According to my back-of-the-envelope math, 60 million mark was north of 20 million American dollars in 1984, and equivalent to, conveniently enough, about $60 million today. Not entirely reliable sources on the internet claim much bigger numbers, but I'm going to be conservative on this one. Regardless, at the time, it was the most expensive movie ever made outside of the US and Soviet Union. Peterson met with Enda in Paris to address Enda's concerns, but it was all for naught. Enda was so incensed by the changes being made, especially to the ending, that he tried to have the production halted or the title changed through a legal injunction, which failed on the merits. He had to settle for just taking his name out of the opening credits. Jumping ahead for a moment, when the movie released, Enda hated it, denouncing it as an orgy of kitsch that turned the never-ending story into the unspeakable story. I'm guessing he never watched the sequels. Bernd Eichinger, who remember wanted to appeal to American audiences, plucked many of the main cast members from California. The lead role of Bastian Balthazar Bux, and yes, his last name sounds just like the word books, which is probably not a coincidence, went to a 9-year-old Barrett Oliver, in part because of his look of wide-eyed innocence. As a child actor, Oliver had a few minor roles to his credit, mostly on television, but The Neverending Story would be his breakthrough, leading to roles in previous review topics Daryl and Cocoon. Meanwhile, his Fantasian counterpart, Atreyu, is played by an 11-year-old Noah Hathaway, best known at the time as Apollo's adopted son Boxy in the OG BSG. Hathaway had to undergo extensive equestrian training, in addition to spending a lot of time in a tanning booth, to become the fierce warrior child the script called for, and the vast majority of his lines were dubbed over in post to make him sound less childish.
I'm the only Atreyu of the Plains people, but I'll be happy to go back hunting the purple buffalo.
Hathaway is now a tattoo artist, but when he goes to fan conventions, he hands out dollar bills to anyone traumatized by the infamous Artax scene. One of the most difficult characters to cast was the childlike Empress. After a very lengthy search, they finally cast an 11-year-old Tammy Stronach, who didn't get the part until 2 weeks before filming began. Other notable actors include Deep Roy as Teeny Weeny, whose lines were also redubbed, British character actors Sidney Bromley and Patricia Hayes as Engiwook and Urgle, Simon & Simon's Gerald McRaney as Bastian's father Barney, the great Moses Gunn as Chiron, who in the book is actually a centaur, and children's cartoon staple Alan Oppenheimer as the voices of Falkor, Gamork, and the Rockbiter.
They look like big, good, strong hands, don't they?
Filming began in March of 1983 at Bavaria Studios in Munich, where they used Stage 4-5, the largest studio set in all of continental Europe, and in Vancouver, Canada, where the Hotel Europe served as Coriander's bookstore, and where Queen Mary Elementary School became Bastian's School. Further location shooting was done on the coasts of Andalusia in Spain. With most of the Fantasia scenes being filmed in Europe and most of the real-world scenes filmed in Canada, the two principal actors, Barrett Oliver and Noah Hathaway, didn't meet each other until after the film wrapped. To do the ambitious special effects, they brought in teams from England, including the film's special effects director Brian Johnson, who had previously worked on big effects landmarks including 2001: A Space Odyssey, Alien, The Empire Strikes Back, and Dragon Slayer. With its impressive puppets, including a full-scale Falkor that still sits on display in Munich today, along with its extensive use of blue screens and complicated matte paintings, the film would have been considered overly ambitious in Hollywood, much less in Germany, where filmmakers had never even attempted anything so grandiose. Man of 1,000 voices Robert Easton, who had been brought in to make the English dialogue more natural, also helped the puppeteers with the animatronic lip movements. For a lot of the puppets, they had to be manipulated in high speed to match sped-up dialogue, because the jerky movements of the electronics required the puppets to be filmed in slow motion. This was a monumental task for the puppeteering teams, some as large as 14 operators strong, who had to not only get all of the movements correctly synced to the fast-moving dialogue, but also to each other. The rehearsal and filming for these sequences usually required even more takes than the regular live action. The orchestral music was composed and conducted by Klaus Doldinger, with famed father of disco Giorgio Moroder brought in to punch up the score for the American version with a variety of synth sounds. Moroder was also tasked with putting together the title track, sung by Kajagoogoo's Christopher Hamill and recently popularized by Netflix's Stranger Things. The song isn't in the German cut. The American version of the film also received more edits than the German version, becoming 7 minutes shorter. Wolfgang Petersen got uncredited editing assistance from his friend Steven Spielberg, who happens to still own the original Orin prop. The Neverending Story released in West Germany in April of 1984, with the North American release following 3 months later. In the US, it received mixed reviews from critics and made a little over $20 million gross, which was lower than the filmmakers had hoped. However, worldwide, it was a smash hit, ultimately raking in a total of over $100 million in US dollars. It did good business on the home video market and became a common sight on cable TV, earning a cult following that persists to this day. It had 2 sequels, an animated television show, and lots of attempted remakes. Now, when it comes to remaking the Neverending Story, I actually support the idea completely. This is because of what the story actually means, and how renewing stories is fully in keeping with it. But I'll explain all that in a minute. As of the making of this video, it looks like there's a series of new movies being planned by Michael Ende Productions and Seesaw Films that will be more strictly based on the novel. Before I talk about my opinion and analysis of the 1984 movie, though, I want to talk about the novel, which I read for the first time last month. The movie essentially tells the story of the book's first half, omitting a few of the more difficult elements like Atreyu's green skin, which they did try according to Hathaway, the giant shape-shifting spider made of wasps that ensnares Falkor, and the old man who, within Fantasia, which is called Fantastica in the English translations of the book, is chronicling events in real time. Given the author's opinion of the film, I was genuinely surprised by how close the novel and movie actually are, and I recommend the book to fans of the film to get a more detailed picture of what's going on and what it all means. However, if you're gonna read it, know that the second half is where it gets really weird, with Bastian becoming a kind of wish-casting god king who slowly loses his mind. Normally, reading a book that was later adapted into a film will make me appreciate a film less, but in this case, I have to say it made me love it even more than I already did. This is, like so many other classics from the 80s, a movie I grew up with. Ironically enough, while it unambiguously glorifies playing hooky to get out of a math test, The Neverending Story was always in my school's rotation whenever a substitute teacher ran out of ideas for what to do with a rambunctious classroom. As such, I've seen it more times than I can even count. But unlike The Wizard of Oz, which I talked about last week, I never stopped watching it as I got older. I even went to go see it with my family when it was re-released in theaters a few years back, despite us owning it on DVD and being able to watch it whenever we want. It's the kind of movie that reinforces in me the power of imagination and storytelling, which, as a writer, I guess I appreciate more than most. On one level, The Neverending Story is about a troubled boy dealing with the loss of his mother who finds escape in fantasy, a way to rekindle his mother's spirit in the childlike empress in the world of Fantasia. Through the book, he's able to tackle an adolescent's understanding of sadness, of fear, and of disaster, and then he finds a way to pick himself back up and, in Enda's words, do what he dreams. On a much deeper, more allegorical level, This is about humanity as a whole. There is a tendency to always believe that kids aren't reading enough, and when children stop reading, generally speaking, they stop believing in fantasy. Adulthood can shave away our spirit of awe and wonder until we go through life worried about the work that needs to be done, grinding away until our inevitable ends, and forgetting the possibilities we imagined when we were young. In other words, the nothing tends to take over. However, as a species, we do cling to our innocence, no matter how diminished it may seem. We tell each other stories to keep our imaginations alive, and with each generation, we renew and refresh those stories, keeping familiar characters and events breathing and contemporary, ensuring that nothing and nobody is ever truly lost. No matter our hardships, as long as we keep telling the stories that keep our dreams alive, they remain never-ending. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. Have you managed to recover from the Artax scene yet? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when a creature of Celtic mythology might put us in an insane asylum, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
Oh.